Good morning. Reviewing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, we're on page 1421. We return to continuing after we studied a few pages in volume 2 about Shemus, the 10 hidden spheres, basically the early processes of how the divine, the completely seamless, shapeless, even beyond seamless and shapeless divine begins to manifest first in name, and then in names, Shmoy into Shmoy Agadol, and then into names, and ultimately the tzimtzum attributes, the spheres which become interface between us and the divine. So he says, Al pianal yuvan inyan ma'irich be'echad. So now we go back to the expression, one who extends their contemplation on echad. So the ma'irich is a key word here, because you're not just saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and moving on, you're contemplating on this Achdus. When we look at a world filled with details and diversity, so essentially the mitzvah here, and this is the mitzvah of actually Yichud Hashem, Miyachid Shmoy, it says Miyachid, to be Miyachid godliness with existence, that requires a contemplation. It requires a serious thought process. And he explained that the thought process is, as the Gemara Razal says, that the goal is lamlichte lemailo lamata ladal deruchis, basically to establish that God is the authority, the king, if you wish. That's the word used for authority, that we are all part of a deeper, godly, higher reality. And that echad is Aleph Ches Daled, the 7 heavens and earth. The Daled Ruche is the 4 directions, basically all of space and time. That it's all b'telim u'miyuchadim. That's all sublimated and united with the divine reality. So Hashem Echad means not just there's one God and not many gods. In other words, monotheism is not just one and not a duality or plurality, but rather there's only one reality. And everything is part of the divine reality. So why do we feel ourselves as separate? And that's due to the tzimtzum and the tzimtzumim, as Kabbalah Chassidus explains, and as he's going to explain here as well. But our job, even though we sense ourselves as separate entities, is to be miyachid, as I said, and that's how, by miyachid, reconnecting, and in many ways you could say that's actually the very goal of science, is finding unity. As we discussed yesterday, the search for the unified field theory. Everything is about unity, that the world has many different aspects to it, and science tries to find the unifying principles and formulas that connect things. So they've gotten it down to 4 things, right? We know there's electricity, electromagnetism, there is, gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear strong force, and the weak force. And basically, once you know these rules, they explain so many different phenomena. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to find that singularity, that one unifying force that connects everything. But that's what science is. For that matter, any intelligent system is built on a unifying principle, which in turn connects many different details. Every machine, every piece of engineering, every successful business is a cohesive entity of many details, all connecting as one. So it's not surprise that all evolves from the ultimate goal of finding the divine unified force within all of existence. So he goes on to explain what does the Isbonenus consist of. So what we learned so far is this: that all these the multitude of details in all existence is coming all. It's all essentially a product, an expression of God's speaking, of letters. So it's a result of this divine speech. And then he gives the example from human speech. Like we see Lamata, that the words, the letters of speech, they originate, they're nichlalim, they're encompassed first in the letters of thought. And from there comes the Messias of speech. And in thought, they become more bittul and more iskalus. And then those esis hamachshav in turn are encompassed in etzema nefesh, where there it's a total seamless unity. So you see there how the details originate from a unified state. And I go back again, you look at everything in existence, you see it that way. The example that I always use consistently is the example of conception of a child, or of a life for that matter. Or the seed, same thing in the world of vegetation. A seed that turns into a beautiful tree, right? So that what do you have? It doesn't begin with all the diverse details. It always begins with one seed, with one cell. And that one cell then splits into two and so on. Now, why is it that way? Because that makes sense to us. It all begins with one point, and then that point expands. The same thing is with everything in mathematics. A point turns into a line turns into a plane as width and length. And the same thing, a business plan. You begin with one key point, a mission, a vision, then you lay an outline, and then the outline fleshed out. So nothing, as I get going back to what point I made before, everything always begins with a point, one nakuda, oneness, and the oneness spreads into details. The human race began with one human being, two human beings, Adam and Eve, and then they had children, the children had children, and here we have 8 billion people on this planet, etc., etc. So basically, it all traces back, when you contemplate, back to the etzem hanefesh. That's lamata. Same thing as an example with all the qualifications of the distinction between us and God. Yuvan lamaila, that the creation, the existence of the worlds came as a mitzias and bechinas ribui. And in a multitude, meaning many details, that all is from the Eisius Sadibur Elyon, from God's 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, as he explains in Shar Yichud V'Amunah, which are the Asara Mamoris, are the central statements that God said, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let there be vegetation, and so on. Eisius Elu Nechlolim Be'eisius Samachshava, as it is an example, Lamata. These letters of speech originate and are encompassed first in letters of thought. And again, letters mean expression. So it's an inner expression of thought. And that in turn is nichlal in Ishmai HaGadol, where it's all Achdus Gomer. And that's why it's so important to understand that highest level of Shmei HaGadol, because there all it is God's capacity. Like we say, Yecholte Lahayr. His capacity, his Yechelis, Shmei HaGadol, we learned earlier, is his capacity to express himself. So when you think of that, then it's all about God expressing himself. Once it comes into letters of thought, and then later letters of speech, those letters, and they in turn create and vivify and sustain existence, then the focus is more on the details. But even now, here, I'm speaking words right now, teaching an idea here. So you can focus on the very words I'm using, or you focus on the idea that's being conveyed by these words, and the idea is a far more unified state. But let's say you wanted to dissect exactly the way I'm expressing it. Sometimes you want to see it that way, like I mentioned with music. You want to analyze the musical notes. You're not focusing right now on the music it creates. What are the actual notes that created this thing? So then you're focusing on details. Same thing with art. You're focusing on the details, or those details lead you, what is the vision of the artist? What's the sentiment? What's the feeling? What's the idea that's being conveyed in this piece of art that's made up of all these details? So in a way, this contemplation is basically looking at the world around us. So I'm looking out the window right now. I see trees. It's snowing here a bit. And I see the street, and I see buildings, and I see a table and a chair. That's the details. But then you think, what's the picture that it's showing? What is the divine picture that God wants me or each of us to see when we look at the world around us? So that's what Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad is doing. I've not seen it in any Sfarim, but I pointed out that perhaps that's why we cover our eyes when we say Shema, because you don't want to look at the details. You want to focus on what they're all leading up to. So in a sense, you don't want to be distracted by the details, so you cover your eyes, because vision, physical vision, sees the details of existence. We want to have the spiritual vision. And ultimately, like here, the ayin to the etzem koyach hariyah. Not just the riyah as it's through the eye, but as it comes from the etzem hanefesh, as we learned earlier, and we'll get back to. So you cover your eye. Bottom line is that the focus is on the achdus. But the Achdus is more apparent. The deeper you go into the source, the more the unity is dominant. The more you go outside, not outside the source, but the more you go down into details, the details are more dominant, meaning dominant in our perspective. So the Hisbonenus is to work our way back from an existence of ribui, many details, back to Eisis Hadibur, Eisis HaMachshava, and obviously there are more levels. We learn Bina, Chachma. Here he's just going through the basic levels, meaning not every detail level, but there are many, many levels here. We spoke about Ratzon, Tainug, but ultimately the Etzem, which is Shmei HaGadol, where there it's Achdus Gomer, because all Shmei HaGadol is God's name. And as we learned, Shmei doesn't have any identity of its own. It's only when you call him by name. So on one hand, it's no identity. It's completely bottled to it's the person who has the name, or like we spoke about, the water is completely transparent and it's just a reflection of the face, but there's no actual face in there. It's pshitus, so it's completely divine. On the other hand, it's divine, already ready to express himself. And we learned that comes from the Chafetz Chesed, that he desired that existence should be that avodas Adam in existence should be teifas makim and should matter, as we learned more in volume 2 in the previous classes. So that's where we're up to, the Achdus Gomer, that comes to in the Shmei HaGadol. And the last piece we learned was, Ube'emes, just like the Shmei HaGadol is in a state of Achdus, utter Achdus, Kein Mameshu B'chinas Eisis HaDibur. The same too, Eisis HaDibur, even though he's already speaking different words, that's what Eisis HaDibur are. Yehi Oyer is not Yehi Rakia, but in truth, when you think about it, it's coming, since it's all coming from the ultimate source of Shmei HaGadol, so the same unity that prevails and dominates in the source also permeates Dibur, the Eisis HaDibur, when you think about it, because even though God created light on day one and the firmament and the heavens on day two, but when you join them together, they're all part of one unified divine objective, which is to create existence, that there should be a dir b'tachtenim. There's one vision. It's not two visions. It's not two levels of godliness. It's all ultimately connects back to the one source. However, that source wants to have a structure which in turn turns into all the details that we see. Here, basically the process of connecting all the details back to its source and seeing that the Achdus of Shmei HaGadol literally is also the Achdus and the Eisis HaDibur, which is going to be very relevant as we continue learning further the different levels of Yehuda, Yelah, Tata, Yehuda, Yelah. He hasn't spelled that out yet. He will spell it out later. That's where we're up to, halfway down page 1421. And of course, it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that this is all part of the central theme of Ayin Beis, which is interface. What I just described, there can be more descriptive way of explaining the concept of interface. We're interfacing between the multitude and details of existence and the diversity of existence with its. So I hope that summary helps put things into context. And of course, who does all this? This is the neshamas that come down below in this world, because this doesn't happen on its own. Hamayruch be'echad is someone saying and contemplating on Shema Yisrael. And that's what the neshama does when it comes down below, with the support of Torah Oyer, as we shall learn. But I'm just mentioning it because that's where it all began, that the neshamas are doing this, and Torah Oyer is Amshacham Almayla Lamata. In contrast to the Yichud, in contrast to Aramim Chelakai HaMelech Mamata Lamayla through Tefillah, that was discussed before page 1350. 1350 was the changeover where he went over from Mamat Lamayla to Mamayla Lamata of Torah Oyer. And all this is coming to explain Torah Oyer and Riyah, and ultimately how the neshama below, like the wick, the divine soul, affects the animal soul to become be absorbed within the wick and create light, the light of the flame of Ner Mitzvah and Torah Oyer, which, as I said, is the bigger theme that we will get back to. So, any questions? I'm happy to take any questions on what I said, and then we'll continue learning.
You mentioned something about this Hiskalalus integration, or at least that the origins of the emanations. I didn't understand what you said, so I can't even ask the question. But you said something about chesed, and that we learned it in when we went back to Ayin Beis, but I don't see it there. I was confused by what you said. Can you please explain that again?
I just summed up what we learned in volume 2. If you go back to page on page 9, what was it, 970? He spoke about the last class we had on that. Maimer spoke about Chafetz Chesed. So I
What
would just
page
go
was
back.
that?
Yeah, on page,
9.
basically it's page 971 and 972, top of 972. So the whole section there, the whole bottom of this page there, we learned it 2 classes back.
Okay.
You know, how Avodas Hashem is Tefes Makom and matters to God because he has a Chafetz Chesed, a desire for kindness. You remember that, team? I'll refer you back
back and read.
2 classes back to those pages.
What was 970?
The last pages in volume 2, 971 and 972.
Okay. I'll reread it. Thank you.
Okay. So we continue here. Middle of the page, the line that begins mamish, end of the line. So it continues, it says, V'yuvan zeh, excuse me. V'yuvan zeh, what will we understand now? He just spoke about the achdus. That even the achdus of Shmei HaGadol permeates also the achdus and Esis HaDibur. We'll understand that from the Mashal Hanal, from the above mentioned example. So we discussed earlier at length this example, if you remember, when he started speaking about Eisius on page 1417, he said Eisius is asa. It means to express, to bring forth, to draw out, to reveal. Those are Eisius. And in Eisius, he said the words, there's a bunch of levels in Eisius. I'm just looking for the exact language. Yesh kama mini Eisius. So the letters that we express, there are many different levels of these letters that come from the nefesh. As we discussed, that all originates from the soul, obviously. A person just having a mouth, if there's no soul within us, the mouth is not going to speak. So he says, so this muscle, the Eisius Adibur Murgashin El Azulas. So one of the things he explained was, what makes the letters of speech unique? Murgashin El Azulas, another can sense it. When I think, you don't know what I'm thinking. And definitely not the Eisius that are deeper in my soul, in the koiches nelomim, in the hidden koiches like Ratzon and Tainug, and definitely not the Eisius that are nefesh malei Eisius, as they are rooted in the core soul's ability to express itself. But when I speak, when a person speaks, the Eisius are margoshin el azulas. It means another person, another individual senses these letters. That's the whole point of speech. You're communicating to another. Shehein b'mitzias dover, which means that these letters are mitzias dover. They have substance. That's why you can hear them, and that's why you can understand them, and you can relate to them. Harisibus adoverhu. What's the cause? If the Eisius in the most sublime state, let's go Shmei HaGadol, or in the Etzem HaNefesh, are completely non-tangible, and they're just the power of expression. So what caused the power of expression to suddenly be expressed in a way that another person can hear it? In other words, what is the dynamic? What's the ingredients of speech that allows it to be heard by another and sensed by another that letters of thought do not have? So he's going to explain that's due to tzimtzum. This is now going to explain the tzimtzum. Because the letters, the energy within the letters gets diminished, so the letters themselves can be formed to be able to express. So if you're like, let's say, when white light is so powerful, then even those letters, it'll just be glaring, and you won't be able to see any distinct letters. You have to somewhat mute the powerful light in order to see distinct letters. And that's true in every given way. Simple eyesight is that way. We learned about Loshen Sagi Nohar. Remember, he said that a blind person in the Torah is called Sagi Nor. Sagi Nor means extreme light. Sagi means a lot of light, abundant light. And he asked the question, a blind person has no light. They can't see. So he says, no, the opposite. The problem is that the membranes and the filters in the eye have become so transparent that the light is shining. You can't see because it's like a bright light. It's like looking at the sun and you're blinded by the light. So a process of true seeing is not just that light is shining into the eye, but also that the iris, as we know, dilates, or what's the opposite of dilating? It expands. That it is able to therefore monitor how much light goes into the eye. It's all monitored so you can see. So he's basically going to explain that Esis Adibur emerge, Sibus Adover, the cause that you sense these letters, because the oir that's shining through those letters, meaning the idea that you're conveying, is much more mitzumtzum b'yeser. It's increasingly concealed or diminished. Whereas in the Meisis HaMachshava, the oir is more revealed. Therefore, so therefore, the letters are more sublime and more subtle, that you only sense them to yourself. So it's an interesting take on this. Would simply say speech is you're actually articulating your ideas in your mind, so that's why another person could hear it. But Chassidus explains it a lot deeper than that. It's because the oir is going through a tzimtzum. That's why another could hear it. Whereas, as long as it's still a machshava, the oir is so dominant that even though there are letters, but the letters are very, very sublime. So something, if you recall, I explained the idea why, when it comes to speaking about the most intimate things and most deepest feelings that you have and thoughts that you don't have words often. You say, I can't really express myself, or I don't really have the words to say it. Why not? When it comes to superficial things, the weather, sports, other things that are very shallow, you can talk about it all day. Because letters are containers. And containers can contain only that much energy. When it comes to more intimate, intense feelings of joy or, God forbid, pain, words are not enough. And that's why sometimes just an oivei, a sigh, a laugh, a cry, can capture more than entire volumes. To the point that the deepest feelings are not even capable of even expressing themselves in sound altogether. So essentially, think of oisis as kalim, and the energy they convey is the oir. The energy meaning the sentiment, the feeling, or the ideas that your words are expressing. So in thought, the sentiment or the idea is more intense, and the letters are more sublime, more subtle. So they can't be sensed by another. In dibur, the oir becomes much more mitzumtzum, and that's why indeed they can be conveyed to another. Similar, when a teacher is teaching, what is he really doing? He's diminishing and somewhat concentrating and condensing all his ideas, the intensity in his mind, in his thoughts, so a student can hear it. So you have to spoon feed it. Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Let's first read a word, then we'll read a sentence, and the sentence will build up into a paragraph. It's all very limited in order to communicate it. So he's explaining the dynamic is because the oir is more mitzumtzum, and that's what allows the letters to take on shape and form. And as a result, another person could hear it and sense those letters, which convey the idea or the feeling that's being conveyed. That's what he said here. Now, and we see, to continue on. One second, let me just make sure. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. If you recall, he spoke about Pnimius HaMeichen and Chitzenius HaMeichen. So if you remember, he said, at the bottom of 1417, he said that in Chitzenius HaSeichel, Machshav even, there the person at least feels that another person can't see those letters of thought, can sense those letters of thought, but you do. But the Pnimis HaSeichel, he said, whenever you go deeper into something, even you yourself don't sense the letters because you're focused and absorbed completely by the concept. So he's now going back and saying like this, that Gam b'Pnimis HaMechen, Sha'er hu naila harbe, ubegili yeser. So you go in a higher level even, there, the Eir is even higher than just regular machshava, Chetzenis HaSeichel. So Eina Eishis Murgoshin Kol Kach Gam La'atzmei Kanal. So then the letters are not even sensed by you. Like I explained that when you're reading, let's say, a book and you're so absorbed and consumed with it, you're not even noticing the letters. Then there's a level of thought where you are noticing and you're discerning the letters. So in thought itself, he's explaining there's two levels. Bottom line is the deeper you go to the Eir, the more the Eir dominates, the less the Kalim or the Oisius are discernible or are apparent. And we see that due to the revelation of a very profound idea of seichel, yochel liyes, what can happen, it's possible scenario shagam esis adibur yeh biltim mergoshim gam la'atzmei. Okay, he's bringing another scenario that he has not brought till here. So in other words, that a person, let me just see how he's going to, 1 second. Okay, so just for the record, what he's doing now is going back. Remember, before I said he just spoke about it in basic terms, in general terms. Dibur, machshava, etzem hanefesh. Or lamayla, dibur ha'elyon, machshava elyon, negas thought, and shmei hagadol in the etzem, before the tzimtzum, all the way up in the eira kol batz museh. But now I see he's going back in the process of Amayirich be'echad. He's actually breaking it down now into the levels that we did learn earlier. Dibur, machshava, pnimis haseichel, then he's going to go to Chochmah, and I see he's going to go to Rotzen and Tainug, and then to Etzem HaNefesh. So just keep in mind that he is now going back and breaking it all down. But now he's doing it with the intention of understanding how Achdus, remember, the point of departure was that the Achdus of Shmei HaGadol permeates even in the Eisius HaDibur, same level of seamlessness. But Dibur itself does break down into expressed words. So he's explaining because of the Tzimtzum, it's happening because of the Tzimtzum. If you were able to get beyond the Tzimtzum, so the Dibur could reveal what's in the thought, and the thought can reveal what's even deeper. So basically, what he's going to be saying is that the contemplation of Amayirich be'echad is really a contemplation of eliminating the filters as much as possible as we work our way back to the source. In other words, to create the diversity of existence, you needed to have a tzimtzum. You need to conceal the divine unity. You need to conceal the divine consciousness, which is the purpose of the tzimtzum harishon, and then all the other tzimtzumim through Seder Shtalshalos have one role. Their role is to allow for existence to emerge. Now we're talking about the Avodah. How do you work your way back? You work your way back by slowly opening these doors that were closed through the tzimtzum and retracing the steps by revealing what's concealed behind the tzimtzum. So the dibur that God is saying, Yehi Eir, is coming from somewhere. That's coming from thought. And the thought is coming from Pnimis HaSeichel. We're working our way all the way back. So if you can eliminate the tzimtzumim, which this is the hard work, of course. When I say eliminate, meaning seeing through the tzimtzum, seeing its purpose, similar to a student who learned Aleph Beis when they were a young child. Then they started learning the verses in Torah, in the written Torah, when they were 5 years old. And then as they grow, what's happening? They start seeing within all that they're learning in the Aleph Beis they learned, the depth of all the ideas of Torah. So you're really working your way back to where your teacher started from, which is the essence of the idea that had to be diminished and had to be channeled and spoon-fed to the student through letters, the letters of speech, starting from Aleph Beis. But the goal is to see within that Aleph Beis all the depth. And to do that, you need to grow, get closer to the Oyer, and slowly dispel, so to speak, the tzimtzum, the concealment, so you can see behind it. It's like the Frieder Rebbe brings from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the whole Torah, the entire Torah, all begins with the Aleph of Anochi. So Aseres HaDibros begins with an Aleph. When you teach a child Aleph, just the letter Aleph, in that Aleph lies the whole Torah. Then the Aleph encompasses the word Anochi. That's already 4 letters. Anochi. Anochi encompasses the first commandment. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hoshichim eretz Mitzrayim. The first commandment encompasses the second commandment and all the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments encompass 613 letters, the entire Torah, as the Rasag, the Rashi brings from Rasad Yagon, explains. The entire written Torah encompasses the entire oral Torah. The entire oral Torah encompasses everything all the way till this very day, all included in the one concentrated Aleph. Like I mentioned, one cell, one seed. So when we learn Aleph, when you start learning Torah, Aleph, you don't see all of that. It's only an Aleph. But when you start unpacking it, the Aleph takes you to Anochi, Anochi takes you to the rest of it. So bottom line is you're coming to see the whole wealth and richness of the wisdom and the will of God in Torah as you grow. And the process essentially, because it all came down at that tzimtzum that you can contain, all you can right now take is an Aleph or letters, general letters of Dibur. And from that, you're making your way back to the energy source itself, which is the Oyer. And the more you go, the more you, the so-called strip away the kalim of the Oisius, the more you experience the Oyer of the energy of the concept and the idea, which is really the process of all intelligence, frankly. You begin by hearing the words, reading the words, getting the basic principles, and then you start understanding its deeper meaning between the lines, all the way up, all the way here, all the way go back, all the way to Shmei HaGadol, ultimately going. So he's describing this process now. So we learned it earlier, the process of how it goes down, it goes from Dibur to Machshav and so on. Now he's discussing it in terms that he wants to explain that ultimately the Achdus that we'll experience when we get back to the original source will also permeate all these levels as we strip the Asius away and we see the energy within it, which is ultimately Achdus Pshuta, exactly as it is in Shmei HaGadol. So really the process is beginning from the details, and the details are working back to that inherent unity that we are, the ultimate Hashem Echad unity of godliness, of God. So, let me stop for any questions, and then we'll go over Anurayim, the next section, which I began reading, but I realized I should give this introduction before we continue on. Are there any questions?
This notion of oisios, letters that are even ideas, thoughts that are not conscious in the mind. Let's say because the aura is too great, they can't be manifested in the kalim of oisios, even in your own mind. Is there any relationship between that and the notion of the subconscious or superconscious? And I guess that's the question.
You could say that because superconscious, you don't sense it, but there you
Right.
don't sense the oil either.
Right.
So
I'm just trying to relate.
I wouldn't really bring that here because that's not necessarily a good example. But yes, the less you sense something, the less kalim there are. So there's more oil to the point. But again, if you bring the superconscious, then you're dealing with a place where you're not even conscious of it altogether.
Right.
Even of the idea, not just the letters.
Right.
So
but
the
I
example
guess
he's giving here is like I gave the example. When you're so absorbed, let's say reading a book or hearing a speech or listening to music for that matter, you're not even noticing and the letters at all. All you are experiencing is the feeling or the idea that's being expressed.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I was just, and I don't know that it's a fair.
Well, we're going to get to Koiches Nelamim. Remember, there's the Oisius in Ratzon and Tainug, which is like the superconscious. That's high. Right now, we're still talking about Koiches Geluyim. In the Koiches Geluyim, there's actual words, speech. There's thought, where you do sense the letters of your thought. And then there's a deeper ideas that you don't even sense it yourself, simply because you're so consumed with the Ur. So we're still talking here in the Koiches Gluyim. We will soon talk about the Koiches Nalamim that he called, which is Keser, or in faculties of a person, Ratzon and Tainug, which is a more superconscious state. So we'll talk about that shortly.
Just a quick follow-up. Again, this may not work at all, but I'm just thinking as you abstract more, or as it becomes more concealed, um, you could, or you say glue. Yeah, you said kochos nalamim. That you're moving in the direction of atzmos. It's becoming more atzmadic, if you will. So I was just thinking in the correlation with the neshama, the five madrigas of the neshama, you're going from neshama to chai and then yechida. You're moving upward toward a more atzmadic energy of Elikus, if you will. That's why I was trying to make some correlation. Can you say that, or it's just that it doesn't?
Generally, you could say it, but since he didn't use those levels, I wouldn't use those terms.
Uh-huh.
But yes, you could say that. The koiches, I don't know if you're familiar with how it works, but the koiches gluyim are generally nefesh, ruach, neshama. The koiches nalamim is chai yechidim.
Okay, there you go. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So now he's going further and saying, not just machshava you don't sense when you're very consumed with the depth of the idea. He says, even dibur, you could be speaking and not even notice that you're speaking. The last looks like what he's going to say now. So he says, we see that due to the revelation of a very profound idea of seichel, yochalias is possible, shagam esis hadibur you built in regashim gam la'atzmei, that even the letters of speech should not be felt only to himself, even to himself. Because you think, okay, speech, you're speaking, how could you not sense your own words? But the fact is, and we know this, speakers will tell you this as well, but especially on a higher level, that you can be so connected to the, plugged in to the so-called main power line of your ideas, that you're speaking, but you're not so much, you're not even sensing that you're saying these words. They're just coming out of you. So there's a time where you sense it, but there's a time you're so passionate about it, you're not even sensing the words. Now that doesn't mean you're not expressing words. Obviously they're coming out and they're coherent and they make sense. But you are so consumed with the feeling that you just, the speech is just automatically flowing out. He says that you don't even build ihergish ba'atzmei klal. Built in mergoshim gam la'atzmei, sorry. That's the words he uses. Why? Like you see a person who's very busy, very consumed with a very profound idea, it's possible, yedaber memela, ba'inyan bli hergish ba'atzmei klal. He could end up speaking without even sensing that he's speaking. You may have seen this. Some people are learning something, a deep thing, and they just say something. You say, what did you say? And you don't even notice, they don't even know that they said something. So there you have an example of a level where their speech is coming out, but the speech itself is not even being sensed. Not just the letters of thought, like he said, but even the speech. So this example he has not given before. It's just another level in the Hamayrik Be'echad that you could have a speech, but the speech just focuses more on the idea than on the letters of speech. So generally speaking, when you're speaking, you're focusing, you're planning your words and you're communicating them. So that's tangible to another and also tangible to you. In machshava, it's not tangible to another, but also tangible to you. In deeper machshava, deeper seichel, you don't even sense the words yourself. And then he says there's a level of deep seichel that even if you say something, an actual speech, you're also not even sensing that you're saying these words. So it's definitely clearly trying to explain a level of achdus, even in the Eisiyas Sadibur, that God created existence. He'll probably mention this later in the Nimshal. Right now it's still in the Moshel, but he lays out yet another level of bringing these two together. So the example here is essentially that communication is essentially a great example for the divine, for our contemplation on bringing divine unity in a diverse of existence. Because the point is to see the energy within the details and not focus on the details so much. But we always have to begin with details because we live in a world of structure and details. Okay, so that's it. Why is that the case? Because he's so consumed and so immersed. So due to the intensity of this Gili air that he's immersed in, Yiyu Eisi is built in Mergoshim. That'll cause that the letters that these ideas are expressing through, you're not even sensing them. They're coming, but you're not sensing them. I mentioned a number of times an example that if I asked you right now what your left leg is doing, before I mentioned it, your left leg was doing something, but you didn't sense it wasn't relevant to you. Now that you're focusing on it, you sense it. So in other words, consciousness itself of something is already an expression of some type of what we call here oisius. But when you're experiencing something and you're completely immersed in it, you don't even feel the very experience, meaning the details of the experience. You're just in it. So when I gave the example of reading a book, of being absorbed in a book. But let's say absorbed in a beautiful sight, or completely taken and mesmerized by the beautiful song, to the point someone comes over and touches you, you like get startled. What's happening? You become so immersed in the oir that the kelim you're not even noticing them. They're completely not relevant because you are become one. The subject and the object have become one. Like when we say a fish in water, or does water get wet? It doesn't get wet because water is wetness. A dry thing gets wet. So we say, Mala Aris Deus Hashem Kamayim Leyam Echasim. The world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. You're saying not just that you'll know godliness, Deus Hashem. That's like there's the knower and there's the knowledge. But you will become so much one with the knowledge that it's like you become filled with water, that the waters cover the sea. You don't even recognize the distinction between the two. Essentially, real love, real connection is total absorption to the point that you're not even sensing, like being in the zone where you don't even realize. When you're in the zone, you're typing or writing something. Ask people who are artists. When they're in the zone, it just comes out of them. It's because they know how to write, obviously, beforehand, so they have the skill. But the flow is so seamless that what you're focusing on is only the you only achdus. It's not the focus on the details. Once you get into the details, you're already somewhat a little away from, you've moved away from the very core. So that's what he's saying. Take it for Ilir, so the Asis are built in Mergoshim. Okay, so he's moved his way up from Asis Hadibur, Asis HaMachshava, and now that itself, two levels, where you sense the letters or you don't sense them. Now he's going to go, this is all Bina, because you're talking about Seichel, Hasaga, comprehension. If you go back, she's going back literally the same steps. At the top of page 1418, he said, that's Bina where there's Kalim. Even Primis Hasaga. Chachma is only a spark of an idea. So now we're going to be moving back to Chachma now. From Bina to Chachma, based on what he said on top of 1418. So he says, there, the Er and Gili is even stronger than in Bina, than in comprehension, even this highest level we just discussed. Because in Chachma, there's altogether just a spark. There's no elaboration, anything. It's just a spark, a concentrated spark. When a thought arises, a flash of a thought arises in a person's mind, even though at this point he doesn't know how, and what, because there's nothing fleshed out. It's just like, epiphany type of thing. It's a flash. Nevertheless, even though it doesn't know that's not due to the fact that there's less seichel. It's because it's the contrary. It's because the seichel is radiating with full intensity, much more than in Bina, which already fleshes it out and breaks it into details. Even when the details are not sensed, but there are details. In Chachma, the Eira Seichel Meir Begili Yeser. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the Nekudas HaSkola, the Benekudas HaSkola, in the spark, in the point of a concept, Meir dakus ha'er, there what radiates is the subtlety of the light, in this case of the idea. So you sense a certain truth. You can't spell it out because it's just purely a spark, but you sense a certain truth, a certain resonating truth. Al-Kaina Esis hem built in the Korin Klal. So before, by there it says built in Murgashin. By Bina, the levels we spoke before, that you don't sense them. Here, then, they're not discernible even. Meaning they haven't even been shaped and formed completely. In the Korin Klal. That's in Chochmah, which is higher. So again, it's just really reviewing the stages I see here on page 1418. And then comes one level higher than that even. There's still more to go. Just want to see where I'm going to stop here. Yeah, I'll go a few more lines just to Uba Keches the Rotzen ve'enig. Now he's going to Keches Nalomim that he called on page 1418, Keches Nalomim. As you see, I'm comparing whatever we're reading here back a few pages because he's literally going through the same stages. So now when you get into Rotzen and Tainug, which is already in Keser, when you talk in the spheres Lamaila, Arich and Atik, Rotzen and Tainug, and Rotzen and Einug are not even Keches Gluyim. Chochmah is at least a conscious idea. The way it is in Rotzen and Tainug, there's nothing conscious there. It's completely concealed. We're not even aware of it. But nevertheless, as we learned in Rotzen B'Tainug, he learned there's also Eisius. If you look back on, as I said, a little way down on page 1418. Because when you say that I want something, I desire Rotzen, I want something, there is some parameters to what you want. However, it's in a very super conscious state. So he says in Rotzen and Tainug, let's see how he says it here. In the faculties of Rotzen Einig, what he called before Keches Nalamim, there he says, Lamayla B'chinis Yislapshus B'kelim, She'era Nefesh Me'esham B'gili Yeser, there the Eira Nefesh is radiating even more revealed than in Chochmah, Uba Madrega Nailis Harbe. So first of all, there's more revelation of the soul, and in a higher level, Al Kena Esis Desham Hemeruchanim B'Yeser. Therefore, the letters there are far more sublime, or far more ethereal. So you see clearly the formula: the more the oir, the less tangible or the less defined are the letters. Ada Esi is the Atzmus HaNefesh, and that was the final step in the mashal. The letters inside the Atzmus core Nefesh, which is essentially no letters at all, just the power to express. Being that there radiate the core itself, so there's no mitzias of letters altogether. So if you recall, we learned about the Esher Spheres Agnuzis. He said, Ein mitzias legnuzis. Right away, reminiscent of that, the idea that here, all that radiates is the Etzem HaNefesh. Does it have the capacity to express itself? Yes, that's why the Eisius are rooted there. But it's not yet in any way in any possible way expressed at all, so it's in Mitzias Klal. So you have the letters don't have a Mitzias at all. You have the level that there's Mitzias, but they're completely concealed. There's a level that Mitzias ain't in Nikodim. They're not yet discernible, Chachma, and Mitzias that they're not Nirgash. You don't feel them even though they're there. And then finally, letters that you actually feel and sense. So basically, the process of going from our conscious state, our human consciousness, to experience divine unity is really stripping ourselves from the defined terms and the defined definitions that we're so accustomed to try to see what is the deeper sublime energy within. And as we do that, the letters begin to not disappear completely, they begin to melt away, they begin to become less apparent to the point that you're reaching the pure itself, beyond Kalim, all the way back to the Etzem HaNefesh, like he said here. This is all still how it is in the Nefesh. V'nimse, and we'll conclude maybe with this line, Harisibus Messias Aesius. What did he begin? What's the cause, therefore, of the existence of letters altogether, expressed letters? Who that simtsum v'helamaer. Being that wherever there's greater light, there's less Aesius. So to say that for Aesius to start becoming apparent and beginning to be tangible and in a way that you can relate to it, that's due to the diminishment and the helam of the air. And that's why when there's more Gilead air, the Aesius become less apparent to the point that they completely are not existent. And all you have is the air, with the potential to manifest in Keli, in Aesius. So this is all the example. Then he's going to go on, and that I think we'll leave for the next class. So he's going back now to the mashal. This is all part of these bonus, giving us, lack of a better word, words, letters, to be able to contemplate on echad of how we move from the details of existence to a more unified place, all the way back to the total, utter seamless unity of Elokus itself, the highest levels. Okay, so essentially, the ideas here we've already learned, but he's spelling it out in more detail with a little more different context a bit, but it's essentially what we have learned, but now he's bringing it back to Amayrich Be'echad, and then he's going to explain how it is above, and of course the main thing he added here is the tzimtzum element. That what's the reason that we do discern letters is because, and we sense them, is because the light, the oir, is getting concealed, and the goal is to go beyond the tzimtzum. Basically, it's to see behind the curtain of the tzimtzum, so we can get to access the very core of existence. And I go back to the example in science. As we discover subatomic particles and subatomic, what are we doing? We're looking at matter that we see, matter that is visible to the naked eye in our sensory tools, let's say water or fire, and the water we break down into hydrogen and oxygen, which in turn, the molecules, atoms, subatomic particles, quarks, all the way back to how far you can go. But essentially, as you go back, you're getting to a more unified place because everything is made up of atoms. It's just a matter of how they get combined together, like we spoke about program language. Everything is zeros and ones. It's just the different ways that they are combined that create ultimately different structures. But the structures are only on the outside level. The deeper you go, the more the unity becomes apparent. Okay. And we'll stop here. Okay. Questions? If there aren't any. I think it's actually quite clear when you think about it with an example. But as I said the other day, key thing is to personalize this in our own Avodah. So when we say Shema today, later today, we contemplate on Ches and Daled is the diversity of existence, and we come to understand the Aleph, Echad, the unity of it all, through this process by looking at how a human being functions. Go from details back to the core source, where it's all united as one. And all the different examples that we've discussed, even though he doesn't bring the example of a seed, or the conception, or the conceiving of a child, but they all work well in the context of from a unified state that breaks down and splits into details, and then retracing it all to that point. I think of it in terms of, if you apply a little Chassidus applied, that we live our lives in such a fragmented way, based on the demands of our jobs, of our families, different responsibilities, different expectations, whatever beckons most. So if someone asks you, what's your life like? There's a lot of things going on in our lives. When you work your way back, you're trying to discover why were you sent to this world. You say in the morning, Moida Ani. What you're really saying is that all these details in my life all go back to the fact that my neshama was returned to me. My neshama is all-inclusive, has an entity that has all-inclusive mission from God, And that really is the driving force that should be driving everything I do. So that unified mission. So indeed, Moedani, the Rebbe was once asked, what is his favorite prayer? He said, Moedani. And indeed, Yutas Kislev, Tavshin Chavav, 1965, Yutas Kislev, the Rebbe spoke a very powerful Farbrengen, where he spoke, that later became what's called the Kuntrus in Yonos Soteres Chassidus, where he explains, according to Chassidus, what Moedani is. Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, and then Yechida of Chassidus. And one of the things he says there is from the Rebbe Rashab, that Moedani is like a Nakuda, a point right in the beginning in the morning. We say it, we make that statement, a unified statement. My neshama was returned to me. And then that Nakuda, like a drop of water, has to spread through the whole day. So literally what we're saying here, the unified mission that you have needs to now permeate every aspect of your life. Your work, your home, your leisure, every detail is connected to the mission for which God sent you, which is a way of applying the echad of Shema Yisrael to our personal lives. What is your unified mission? Do you know it? And then, of course, you want to implement it. So just a way of making this a little more personal, and that's where it really comes alive. Like I said, if you really want to understand this, not just theoretically, you have to ask yourself in your own personal life, where do I have the details of my life, even the fragments, and how do I connect them all back to that one align them all to that one mission? You know, when Hashem says to Adam Arishan, so Yutas Kislev story, when the minister asked the Alter Rebbe, what means ayeka? That after Adam sinned, the Chet Eitz Hadas, so he hid himself, he covered himself, he hid himself. And Hashem comes to the Gan Eden and says, where are you? Now, of course, he knew where he was. As the minister asked the Alter Rebbe, what's Hashem? So the Alter Rebbe gave him Rashi's answer. And he says, I know what Rashi says, I want to know what you say. And the Alter Rebbe answered, ayeka is the universal question that God asks every human being. You've lived your life so many years. And he actually chose the amount of years of this minister's life. And you live so many, where are you? Where do you stand? What have you accomplished? Have you fulfilled your mission? I don't recognize. So God was not asking him where you are physically. It's like sometimes someone's sitting in your right near you, but their mind wanders off. You see they're not there with you. You ask, where are you? You know where they're sitting. You're not asking where, you're asking where their mind and their heart. You're not present with me. I don't feel that you're with me. So God was basically saying to Adam, once you ate from the tree of knowledge, I told you not to eat. A dissonance came into play. There's some separation between us. Where are you? You're not aligned with the mission for which you were created. You've betrayed yourself and betrayed me. So essentially, the process here is to reverse and reconnect and realign our consciousness with all its details, realign to the purpose of our lives, that unified purpose. And of course, each of us goes through these levels, Dibur, Machshava, you went through Nabina, Chochma, all the way to Keser, Ratzon, and Tainug, all the way to the Etzem, which we're going to learn, of course, more about that in the next section. But it's just a way of like somewhat personalizing it. The more you can personalize it, the more this comes alive in a way that really, you can really understand it, as I've emphasized time and again. So we'll stop here, and I'll leave it up to anyone who wants to ask anything.
I have a question if nobody else does. By the Eibishter, as you abstract, or as you try to go from hiskachus to achdus, as you go from particularity to unity, singular unity, it makes sense that things become they become more atzmidic, they become more atzmi. The higher you go, the more you abstract into a singularity that's closer to atzmus, as opposed to the opposite, where everything's completely scattered and differentiated and seemingly random. That's the kind of dark world we live in. So by the human being, though, when you talk, he's using the mashal of ideas and speech, etc., oisios, etc. He's trying to use the mashal in the same concept. That is, as you abstract, as one of you abstract it, the idea, and then a subconscious or superconscious idea, then the or is greater, the kalim are fewer. Okay, but the question is, where does a bad idea come from? A good idea, I can understand, comes ultimately from that aspect of God that's in me, the but where does a bad idea come from? God doesn't have bad ideas, but we do. Now I understand we're made of different. We have different inclinations.
Yes.
You
So
understand,
look,
Shiloh?
yeah, but what seems obvious to me, it's only a mushal what's relevant to our nimshal. You can't just a mushal always going to be limited. When every example you give, there's a point where you don't use the example anymore. I would not use the example when it comes to bad ideas. A person has a bad idea or a destructive idea that comes into your mind. It doesn't fit in this context here. Here he's talking about a healthy process of general communication of, you're teaching Torah, let's say, in speech, and that originates from thought and so on. So I would say this is what you're going already is the area where the mashal is not relevant to the nimshal here.
Okay.
And this is always the case. The places where you just have to stop and say, okay, the
Doesn't
mashal doesn't
apply.
apply here. Now, if you want to just have an exercise in imagination, sometimes you could say, a bad idea would be like when a person chooses badly, and instead of creating achdus with Hashem, they use their speech to go and incite people to do something destructive. But then, essentially, you're going the opposite of achdus. You're bringing pirud into the world. I mean, you could do that. That's because you have free will. But I wouldn't go there because that's like entering now a different zone of what happens when you. But as a mushal goes, the beauty of the mushal is that we have something very tangible of how, let's just talk, you're talking to someone you love. You love them deeply, but you want to express it in words. But the words are always going to be inadequate. And yet, you'll still say words, and you'll say, in your words, you'll say, whatever I say, it doesn't carry all my feeling. And yet, you still try to capture some of the intimacy and some of the intensity of your soul in your words. So, it works well because this is a very good example of human interactions and human communication of how we should communicate with God. Now, as I said, that's the scope of what this mashal is about. I wouldn't go outside of that scope.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we shall stop here, close to the bottom of page 1421. Yeah, good.
By the way, I asked a question in the beginning when you gave the introduction, the Indian of the Chesed, that the revelation is the the impetus for revelation, for expression, godly expression is Chesed. It is the point there being that Chesed is something that one gives to another. It's necessarily relationship oriented. It's necessarily expressive. Whereas, let's say, Gvura is restrictive. It's necessarily more to the self. That's what the place of Chesed is? It's the beginning of expression. Is that
No, that's not what he says there. There, the point is that it's not due to anything except his God
desire
desired
to?
due to his love. He wanted to have a relationship.
Uh-huh. Okay. But Aura is Chesed and Gvul is Gvura. Yes.
Yeah, but that's not the chesed we're talking about. Chesed
Uh-huh.
is in context of gvura. Chafetz chesed is more a wish, a divine desire to do chesed.
I see.
It includes everything there. I mean, go back to that page, but yeah, that's the general concept. Yeah.
I'll go back and read it again. Thank you.
I mean, you could say because it's chesed, that's why it creates a relationship, but I don't think that's what he means there. There he means to say, if you look, he asked the question, since existence is so inferior, is so meaningless to God, why should our avodah matter to him? So he says it's only due to his chafetz chesed, due to his kindness, and he says that it should be considered as if it's valuable to him. But it's not because it's actually valuable, it's because his chesed wants it to be valuable. That's what he says there.
Thank you.
As I explained it at length, that's a level of the divine where it's completely on God's terms. It's not because, that's why the expression God needs us that some people use is inaccurate in every possible way, because that's only after God chose to need us. Because if God needs us, you're already defining God by his need. And you have to say God doesn't need anything. And yet, in that very state where he doesn't need anything, he chose to love. And therefore, to create that existence should matter to him, as he explains there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
He's beyond love too, though, right? I mean, it's not.
That's true, but then he wants that love.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, just like he's beyond anything, but he desires to have a home in this. We don't have it. There's beyond reason there. There's no reason or logic. It's just an expression. It's the best way we can describe something that's coming from God for no reason of his own being. That's really what we're saying. We just need some words. We're talking words, but it doesn't mean that God has love in him. It means that it's a result of his love. That's how I would put it. Not because he has love and he needs love or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll stop here at the bottom of page 1421.
We have class tomorrow.